Hi, I'm Jodi Barrows with the Square in a Square system, and today I want to talk about the three most popular units in the quilt world, and that is the Square in a Square, the Flying Geese, and the half square triangles. And those just happen to be option 1, 3, and 4 of the Square in a Square system. Let's look at this quilt behind me. It's called Union Square, and in this quilt we have used those three options. Here's the option 1, the Square in a Square that we fussy cut in the very middle. We have used the Flying Geese for the center of the outside star, and we have used the half square triangles to complete that row in the block. With the option 1, 3, and 4, you will learn the basic trimming, which is leaving the 1/4 of an inch, and the Texas two-step that allows you to cut your units up to get those nice sharp points for Flying Geese and half square triangles. Now let's see how that works in the system. Watching the videos will help you become more familiar with the different units of the Square in a Square system. I love it when I get an email or a text from someone and they say, I now have the eyes or the ability to see the different options in the quilts when I look in a book or go to a quilt show. And I always smile and say, you now have square eyes. You're seeing the Square in a Square system in every quilt that you look at. It's amazing how one system and one tool creates every unit, and it does it in any size that you want. Now, this is our basic square, and in a lot of the videos I show you how we make the basic square. But in this one, we're just going to talk about trimming and sizing and location in the two quilt examples that I have. The first one is all scrappy. That means you're going to get a different color in each side. The second one is opposites are the same. And then we even have one where all 4 sides are the same. And it's important where you put your color on the square so that you can get the design and the look that you want. Now, to do the option 1, we're going to leave the 1/4 of an inch on all 4 corners, and that will be a square in a square. Notice how nice and neat the work is. You're always going to have your perfect points for your seam allowances. And depending on the scrap size or the way that you cut your strips, you may get slightly blunted corners, and that's actually good and okay. So for the first one, I'm just going to take the 90 and put it right in the tip or the corner of that fabric square in the middle. Once I start cutting, I'm going to look along the outside edge where I've already cut to make sure that my block is staying square. Even if my lines inside here are not lining up perfect, I want my block to stay nice and neat on the outside edges where I've already cut. And of course, you've got to leave that 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. See how that 1/4 of an inch comes right off the tip of that 90. And that's what I'm pushing into the corner of that fabric square. I'm looking at my lines to line it up, and then I'm looking at here to see if my block is staying square. And I'll want to just kind of position it, move it around, wiggle it just a little bit so that the outside edges look nice and neat, even if it's not perfect inside. And that's part of the forgiveness of the system, is that it lets the human element of the cutting, sewing, and pressing improve with the way that you lay the ruler on there to trim it up. So here we have option 1 of the Square in a Square system, just a plain old Square in a Square. So now we want to do Flying Geese. So to make our Flying Geese, we're going to trim 2 sides, leaving the 4th, and those are going to be opposite of each other. And the other 2 sides, we're going to go nice and sharp right up to the point. So when you go nice and sharp, I want you to put the 90 in there, and we're going to step it over or drag it over 2 lines. We call it the Texas two-step because you put your ruler, put the 90 right in that corner of the square, and then you step over 1, 2. Make sure it's nice and sharp. You want it to be a sharp point. You don't want it to be blunted. Look where you've already cut. Make sure you're staying square. So 2 opposite sides, we did the Texas two-step, meaning a sharp corner. And on the other 2 sides, we're going to put the 90 in there and just leave it. And see how it leaves that 1/4 of an inch? Check your outside edges to make sure you're staying as square as possible. So see that 1/4 of an inch off of that point? That's going to be the nose or the top of the Flying Goose. So we left the 1/4 of an inch on 2, Texas two-step, meaning trim sharp. Now I'm just going to put the edge of the ruler right through the sharp trim. And I look at my grids on my ruler to make sure that I'm staying square. But the main thing is to just come in there and separate those off. Now notice how I had the same color on opposite sides. So if I wanted to put these together for like a traditional flying goose, see how I have all of those reds going in one direction and all of the checks going in the other. Now if I was going to use this for a star, see how those colors would just continue to rotate around. Now if I had a whole stack of flying geese that I was making for a quilt and I wanted these all to be trimmed the same way, notice how the darker red is always on the left side of the 1/4 of an inch trim. So when I come in here to trim, I want to put the 90 in there, leave the 1/4 of an inch, and notice how the darker red is under the left, just like it was under the left there. That way my whole stack, all of mine will turn out to be the same. So that if I put them in a traditional flying goose, the darks are here and the lighters are here. Or if I want to use them in a star, it goes every other one as it circles around. So wherever you have the 90, those two colors stay together. I say they stay married. But wherever you have the sharp point, those two get separated. So always think about the 90 and where the color will be when they're staying together. So hopefully that's a helpful tip on color. Now let's look at there's our flying geese. Now we want to make some half square triangles. So this one, I just had some scrappy pieces that I put on here. Even still has a few threads on it from the previous project. Lots of times people talk about, oh, look at all those pieces you're cutting off. But I really, this doesn't bother me because I'm getting nice sharp work. I'm already using scraps in some of the projects. And this doesn't have to just go in the trash bin. You can sew it onto another square. Now, if this square was smaller, think how you could put that on and just let the ruler trim it up. Of course, the square would need to be about a 1/2 inch smaller for those to work. Look at this piece of fabric here. It was a scrap that I used off of something else. We forget in this day and age that that's how quilts were made. They were made from scraps. People never would have bought fabric for their quilts like we do today. So just keep recycling your scraps. Okay, for the half square triangles, which is option 4, we did option 1, leave the 1/4 of an inch on all. We did option 3, where we did the Texas two-step and leave the 1/4 of an inch. And now we're going to Texas two-step all 4 corners. So the 90 is going to go in there, and I just step it over, and I do all 4 corners. Now, notice how it's nice and sharp. The lines go down one side, and when I go back to that point, see how I have a grid line right there that goes nice and sharp through that point. Now, the first time you cut, find the best corner. But once you start cutting, you've got to keep it square with where you've already cut, even if your lines in here are not lining up perfectly. That's part of the forgiveness of the square and a square system. So just put your 90 in there and step it over. Also remember, don't make your strips too long when you're sewing them around your square. Don't space them out too much, and don't make these too long. See how this one is wide? I didn't go in and resize that scrap when I put it on there because the system will trim off everything that it doesn't need. So it really helps save you time, and it gives you more accuracy, and it allows you to go back in and use up a lot of those strips from leftover projects that normally would have just sit in a basket. Okay, so here we've Texas two-stepped all 4 corners. Now I'm just going to come in here and cut through the block on all 4 corners. So be careful not to let it wiggle. Once again, I use my grids to make sure I'm staying as square and neat as possible. I will come through here and cut through those other corners. And there I have my perfect half square triangles with no papers to peel, no grids to draw, just nice clean work ready to go into your quilts. So here we had option 1s, we had option 3s, and we have our option 4s. So let's look in this cute little tiny quilt. Let's look at what we've used. So in this very top row and in the corners, we have half square triangles. There's 4 of them. So 1 square will give me 4 of those. Then we have just a little 2 patch, and then we have a tiny little flying goose. Do you see that little tiny flying goose? With my finger there, you can see how it's just 2 fingers wide. And then 2 squares, flying geese, 2 squares. Now the flying geese and the 2 squares continue on the outside edge of all 4 of those sides. Then you can see just a plain square with a 4 patch, and those repeat. And then here you see the 4 patch with a tiny little option 1. So just a square and a square, leaving the 1/4 of an inch. And those alternate, and then the rows just alternate. So this is a quilt where we've used option 1 square and a square, option 3 flying geese, and option 4 half square triangles. Now let's go back to the union square quilt that you saw at the beginning, and let's look at these units in that quilt. Now remember, the Square and a Square Volume 1 reference book is a must-have book. It has the options 1 through 17. Those are all of the options that start out with a plain square in the middle. It also has your charts starting on page 34. I think there's 12 or 18 pages of charts, and it will tell you when you're doing your own thing how to know what size of squares and strips so that your units turn out to match somebody else's quilt in a magazine or in a pattern or a book. This is the book I use to write everything, all the new patterns and new books that I do. Now let's look at this quilt here behind me. This is Union Square, and we have used options 1, 3, and 4 in this quilt. So on the outside edges, we used an option 4, there, and of course there. And then on this inside unit here, we've used a flying goose, so that means there's no seam right here going through the middle. No seam means no human element, no cutting, no sewing, no pressing. So it's going to give you more accuracy. And then we did a fussy cut in the center. We did the strips on the side, and that is a big option 1 that goes in there. Of course, this is your block, and it's put on point so that this will set straight for our fussy cut. But it's just a very simple, easy block using option 1, option 3, and option 4, the half square triangles. The system will give you ease and accuracy so that you can get fast, fun, and fabulous quilts and remove the human element. Remember to watch our YouTube channel, give us a thumbs up, and subscribe for more educational videos using the Square and a Square system.